Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab. Now let's begin. Clark Compton had built his life on precision. As a forensic accountant who'd helped the FBI crack white-collar cases for over a decade before going private, he understood patterns, anomalies, and the importance of details others missed. But nothing in his training prepared him for the phone call that came at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in October. "Mr. Compton? This is Laurel Camacho, Eddie's teacher at Riverside Elementary." The woman's voice carried genuine concern. "I wanted to touch base about something we've noticed. Your son hasn't been eating lunch for the past 3 weeks." Clark's hand tightened around his phone. "That's impossible. I pack his lunch every morning. PB&J, apple slices, granola bar, juice box. Same routine for 2 years. I understand, but Eddie sits at his desk during lunch period. When I ask him about it, he says he's not hungry or that he already ate. I thought perhaps there were issues at home, financial difficulties, dietary restrictions we should know about." Heat crept up Clark's neck. "Ms. Camacho, my son is not going hungry. Something else is happening here." After the call ended, Clark sat in his downtown office, staring at the city skyline without seeing it. Eddie was 8 years old, bright and energetic, with his mother's green eyes and Clark's stubborn determination. The kid loved food, especially the lunches Clark prepared. What could make him stop eating? His wife Deanna worked as a pharmaceutical sales representative, often traveling 3 days a week. They'd met at Northwestern University 12 years ago, married after graduation, and Eddie arrived 3 years into their marriage. Life had been good, stable income, nice house in the suburbs, plans for a second child. But lately, something had shifted. Eddie had grown quieter over the past month. Less enthusiastic about their weekend projects in the garage, less talkative at dinner. Clark had attributed it to growing pains, maybe social issues at school. Now this. He called Deanna, reaching her voicemail. She was in Cleveland for a 3-day conference. He left a message about the teacher's call, then made a decision that would change everything. At 3:15 p.m., he told his assistant he was taking a family emergency day and drove home to their house in Elmwood Park. The autumn afternoon was crisp, leaves scattering across their quiet street. He parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, entering through the back gate and settling into the garage with a view of the kitchen through the side window. The house appeared empty. Eddie's bus wouldn't arrive until 3:45. Clark positioned himself behind Deanna's car, phone ready to document whatever happened. At 3:52, the school bus rumbled past. Eddie's small figure trudged up the driveway, backpack hanging off one shoulder, his shoulders slumped in a way that made Clark's chest tighten. The boy disappeared into the house through the front door. Then, at 4:03, a silver Cadillac pulled into the driveway. Clark recognized it immediately, his father-in-law's car. Elwood Peterson climbed out, a tall man in his mid-60s with silver hair and the erect posture of someone who'd spent 30 years as a high school principal before retirement. He carried a brown paper bag. Elwood had a key to their house. He and Deanna's mother, Glenna, lived 15 minutes away and often helped with Eddie when both Clark and Deanna were working. But Deanna was out of town, and Clark had specifically told Elwood they didn't need help this week. Through the window, Clark watched Elwood enter the kitchen. Eddie appeared moments later, setting his lunchbox on the counter. The boy's face was expressionless, almost mechanical. Elwood opened the lunchbox. Clark's carefully prepared lunch sat untouched, sandwich wrapped in wax paper, apple slices in a container, granola bar, juice box. His father-in-law's face twisted with what looked like disgust. Without a word, he dumped everything into the trash can. Every item. Then he opened the brown paper bag he'd brought and transferred its contents into Eddie's lunchbox. Clark's pulse hammered in his ears. He pulled out his phone and started recording. Elwood placed his hand on Eddie's shoulder, leaning down to speak directly into the boy's ear. Clark couldn't hear the words, but Eddie nodded solemnly. The interaction lasted perhaps 2 minutes before Elwood straightened, patted Eddie's head, and left through the front door. Clark waited until the Cadillac disappeared down the street before entering the house through the garage. Eddie sat at the kitchen table, the new lunchbox in front of him, unopened. "Hey, buddy," Clark said, keeping his voice light despite the rage simmering in his gut. Eddie's head snapped up, eyes widening. Dad, you're home early. Finished my work early. How was school? Fine. The boy's gaze darted to the lunchbox, then away. Clark moved to the refrigerator, playing casual. You hungry? Want a snack? No, thanks. I'm good. Did Grandpa Elwood stop by? Eddie froze. Yeah, just for a minute. That's nice of him. Clark grabbed a water bottle. Hey, can I see your lunchbox? I want to check if I need to buy more juice boxes. I'll do it later. But Clark had already reached for it. Eddie didn't stop him. The lunchbox felt heavier than it should. Clark's hands trembled slightly as he unzipped it. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was a sandwich, but not the one he'd made. This one looked homemade with what appeared to be turkey and Swiss cheese. There was also a container of cut vegetables, a chocolate chip cookie, and an envelope. An envelope. Clark pulled it out. It was sealed, with Eddie's name written on the front in Elwood's distinctive handwriting. He looked at his son, who'd gone pale. Eddie, how long has Grandpa been bringing you these lunches? The boy's eyes filled with tears. He said not to tell you. He said it was our secret. Clark knelt beside his son's chair, forcing his voice to stay calm. Buddy, there are no secrets like this. Whatever's happening, you're not in trouble. But I need to know the truth. Eddie's voice came out small. He throws away your lunches every day after school. Then he gives me his lunch and the letter. He makes me read it before bed. What do the letters say? Eddie's tears spilled over. That you're not really my dad. That Mom made a mistake marrying you. That he's going to prove you're a bad person, and then I won't have to live with you anymore. The world tilted. Clark pulled his son into a fierce hug, feeling the small body shake with sobs against his chest. Over Eddie's shoulder, he stared at the envelope in his hand, and something cold and methodical settled into his mind. The same calculating focus he used when hunting financial criminals, but sharper now, more personal. Elwood Peterson had made a catastrophic mistake. He'd targeted Clark's son, and Clark Compton didn't just solve puzzles. He destroyed people who hurt his family, and he did it legally, thoroughly, and with the kind of precision that left no room for escape. But first, he needed to understand exactly what he was dealing with. He opened the envelope. The letter inside was typed, single-spaced, full of poison. It detailed supposed evidence of Clark's unstable behavior, aggressive tendencies, financial irresponsibility, infidelity. All lies, but written with the authoritative tone of someone building a case. At the bottom, a handwritten note. Your mother knows the truth. Soon everyone will. Be patient, Eddie. Grandpa will save you from him. Clark photographed the letter, then carefully placed everything back in the lunchbox exactly as he'd found it. His mind was already working, connecting dots, forming hypotheses. This wasn't random cruelty. This was systematic, planned, which meant Elwood had a goal. He needed to know what that goal was. And he needed to know tonight. After settling Eddie with a real dinner and reassuring him repeatedly that he'd done nothing wrong, Clark waited until his son was asleep. Then he did what he did best. He investigated. Elwood and Glenna Peterson lived in a modest ranch house in Oak Park. Clark had been there dozens of times for family dinners and holidays. He'd always found Elwood formal but harmless, a retired educator who lectured about proper grammar and the decline of standards in schools. Glenna was warmer, always baking cookies and asking about Eddie's activities. But Clark had learned long ago that people showed you what they wanted you to see. He drove past their house at 11 p.m. Lights blazed in Elwood's study. Through the window, Clark could see his father-in-law hunched over a desk, writing. He circled the block twice, considering his options, then made a call to Deanna. She answered on the third ring, voice groggy. Clark, what's wrong? It's almost midnight. I need you to come home. Tomorrow. First flight. What happened? Is Eddie okay? Eddie's fine. Physically. But your father has been psychologically abusing our son for weeks. And I need you here when I confront him. Silence. Then, what are you talking about? Clark explained everything. The teacher's call, his surveillance, the lunchbox, the letters. Deanna's breathing grew ragged as he talked. My father wouldn't. Clark, there has to be an explanation. Maybe he was just trying to help, and you're misinterpreting. I have photos. Video. I have the letter, Deanna. This isn't a misunderstanding. Your father is deliberately trying to turn our son against me and apparently has been collecting evidence of my supposed inadequacies. The question is why? I'll catch the 6 a.m. flight. Don't do anything until I get there. But Clark was already pulling up property records on his laptop. Elwood and Glenna Peterson had owned their home for 32 years. No mortgage. Modest retirement income from Elwood's pension and Social Security. Unremarkable. He dug deeper, accessing databases he'd built connections to through years of forensic work. Financial records, court filings, anything that might explain what was happening. At 1:47 a.m., he found it. A lawsuit filed 3 months ago in civil court. Peterson versus Compton. Grandparents' rights case. Petition for visitation. The filing claimed that Clark was an unfit parent and that Elwood and Glenna deserved court-ordered access to their grandson to protect his welfare. The case had been dismissed for lack of standing. Illinois law didn't grant grandparents automatic rights when both parents were alive and married. But there was a note in the file, motion to reconsider pending, contingent on additional evidence of parental unfitness. Elwood wasn't just writing poison letters to Eddie. He was building a legal case. The lunches, the psychological manipulation, all of it was designed to create documentation of Eddie's poor relationship with his father. Maybe Elwood planned to coach Eddie to make statements. Maybe he was hoping Clark would react badly when he found out, giving him real evidence of instability. Clark leaned back in his chair, a cold smile forming. Elwood thought he was playing chess. But Clark had spent a decade finding creative solutions to complex problems, and he'd never lost a case where he was personally invested. His father-in-law wanted war. He'd get one, but on Clark's terms, following Clark's rules, with an ending that would ensure Elwood Peterson never threatened his family again. He opened a new document on his computer and began typing. Not a letter, a plan. By dawn, he had it. 3 phases, each designed to trap Elwood using his own tactics, his own arrogance, and his own words. It would take time, maybe 2 weeks, and it would require perfect execution. But when it was over, Elwood wouldn't just lose. He'd destroy himself publicly, legally, and completely. Clark had learned something important in his years hunting criminals. The best revenge wasn't about hurting someone. It was about making them hurt themselves while you documented every moment. Deanna arrived home at 9 a.m., exhausted and shell-shocked. Clark showed her everything, the videos, the photos, the letters, the court filing. She sat at their kitchen table, hands covering her face, shoulders shaking. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would he do this?" "Because he doesn't think I'm good enough for you. He never has. And he's decided Eddie deserves better." Clark's voice was flat. The lawsuit confirms it. He wants custody, or at least court-ordered visitation without our consent. He's trying to prove I'm unfit. This is insane. He can't actually believe. It doesn't matter what he believes. What matters is what he's doing to Eddie. Clark pulled up a photo of their son's face from yesterday, pale and frightened. 3 weeks of psychological torture, Deanna. 3 weeks of our 8-year-old being told his father is evil. That has to end. Today. We'll get a restraining order. Talk to a lawyer. We'll. No. Clark's voice cut through her panic. We're going to do something better. We're going to make sure Elwood can never do this to anyone again. Not just to us, but to any family. Deanna looked up, and Clark saw something in her eyes he'd rarely seen. A hardness, an anger that matched his own. She was a mother first, and Elwood had hurt her child. "What do you need me to do?" Clark smiled. Phase 1 was about to begin. That afternoon, Clark called Elwood. Kept his voice friendly, casual. "Hey, Elwood. Just wanted to thank you for checking on Eddie yesterday. Deanna mentioned you've been helping out while she's traveling." A pause. Of course. The boy needs proper supervision. The condescension in those 5 words told Clark everything he needed to confirm. "Listen, Deanna's back now, but she's exhausted from travel. Any chance you and Glenna could watch Eddie after school this week? We'd really appreciate it." Another pause, longer this time. "I suppose we can manage that." "Great. I'll drop him off at your place tomorrow after school. Around 4. That would be acceptable." After hanging up, Clark turned to Deanna. He took the bait. "Now, we move to phase 2, which is, we give him exactly what he wants. We'll let him think he's winning. And while he's busy congratulating himself, we build a case that will bury him so deep he'll never see daylight again. Clark spent that night in Eddie's room, sitting on the edge of his son's bed, explaining in age-appropriate terms what was going to happen. Grandpa Elwood has been confused about some things. He's been telling you stuff that isn't true. But Dad's going to fix it, okay? You're going to spend some time at Grandpa's house this week, and he might say more things that aren't true. But here's what I need you to know. None of it is real. I love you. Mom loves you, and you're the best thing that ever happened to us. Eddie's small hand gripped his. Is Grandpa a bad person? Clark considered the question carefully. Grandpa has done bad things. That doesn't make him all bad, but it means he needs to face consequences. And he will. I promise you that. Are you going to hurt him? No, buddy. I'm going to let him hurt himself. There's a difference. The next day, Clark dropped Eddie at Elwood's house. Glenna answered the door, all smiles and warm greetings. Clark played his part perfectly, grateful, slightly harried, relieved to have help. He noticed the way Elwood watched from the living room, satisfied smirk on his face, already thinking he'd won another round. What Elwood didn't know was that Eddie's backpack now contained a small audio recorder, legally purchased and set to voice-activated recording. Illinois was a two-party consent state for recordings, but there were exceptions for protecting minors from abuse. Clark had consulted with 3 lawyers before taking this step. Everyone confirmed that if Elwood continued his psychological manipulation, the recordings would be admissible as evidence of child abuse. And Clark was betting everything that Elwood couldn't help himself. He was right. When Clark picked Eddie up 3 hours later, his son was quiet but nodded when Clark asked, "Did you keep the recorder hidden?" They drove 2 blocks before pulling over to review the audio. Elwood's voice came through crystal clear. "Your father doesn't understand what's best for you, Eddie. Men like him, they're selfish. They think about money and their jobs, not about family. Your mother made a mistake marrying him. But don't worry, I'm gathering evidence. Soon, a judge will see the truth, and you'll come live with Grandma and me. Wouldn't that be better?" Eddie's small voice, "I don't want to live away from Mom and Dad. You'll understand when you're older. Your mother will visit. Maybe your father too, if the court allows it. But you'll be safe with us. We'll give you a proper upbringing. Not this chaos." The recording continued for 47 minutes. Elwood coaching Eddie on what to say to his teacher. Elwood discussing his legal strategy. Elwood making disparaging comments about Clark's family background, his career, his parenting. All documented, time-stamped, impossible to deny. Clark saved the file to 3 separate locations. Phase 2 complete. Phase 3 would be more delicate. It required Elwood to make one final, catastrophic mistake. And Clark knew exactly how to ensure that happened. He waited until Friday, then called Elwood again. "Hey, something's come up at work. Big emergency client situation. I might need to fly to Houston this weekend. Is there any chance you and Glenna could watch Eddie from Saturday morning through Sunday afternoon?" "This weekend? That's quite short notice." "I know, and I'm sorry. Deanna's leaving for another conference. Unavoidable. We're really in a bind. If you can't, I'll have to bring Eddie to the office with me. Let him sleep on the couch while I work." "Absolutely not. The boy needs stability. Glenna and I will take him." Perfect. Clark didn't go to Houston. Instead, he and Deanna executed the most important part of their plan. While Eddie stayed with his grandparents, they met with a family law attorney, a child psychologist, and a detective who specialized in family cases. They presented all their evidence, videos, photos, audio recordings, the court filing, and Eddie's own statements about the psychological abuse. The attorney was a sharp woman named Patricia Ruiz who'd built her career on protecting children from toxic family situations. She listened to everything, reviewed the evidence, then looked at Clark with something like approval. "This is one of the most thorough documentations of psychological abuse I've seen. Most parents react emotionally. They confront, they rage, they make mistakes. You built a case. I want him destroyed," Clark said quietly. "Legally, publicly, permanently. I want everyone to know what he did. Then here's what we're going to do." The plan Patricia outlined was elegant. They would file for a protection order on Monday, backed by all the evidence. Simultaneously, They'd report the psychological abuse to DCFS, the Department of Children and Family Services. The combination would trigger an investigation that Elwood couldn't dodge or manipulate. His grandparents' rights case would be automatically dismissed. More importantly, the filing would be public record. But Patricia suggested one addition. Let's give him a chance to confess. Sometimes the cover-up destroys people more than the crime. If we can get him on record denying everything, then prove he lied, it'll be devastating. Clark smiled. I know exactly how to do that. Sunday evening, after picking up Eddie, Clark called a family meeting at a neutral location, a conference room at Deanna's office building. He invited Elwood and Glenna, told them it was about Eddie's well-being and recent concerns. They arrived at 7 p.m., Elwood wearing a suit as if attending a tribunal. Glenna looked worried, hovering by her husband's side. Clark and Deanna sat across from them, Eddie safely at a friend's house. Thank you for coming, Clark began. We need to discuss something serious. Elwood's expression was carefully neutral. Of course, we're always happy to help with Eddie's welfare. That's interesting, Clark said, because I've discovered that you've been throwing away the lunches I pack for my son and replacing them with your own. For weeks. Glenna gasped. Elwood didn't flinch. I don't know what you're talking about. Really? Because I have video of you doing exactly that. Multiple times. If you've been spying on me, I was protecting my son, which brings me to the letters you've been sending home with him. The ones telling him I'm unfit to be his father. Now Elwood's mask cracked slightly. Eddie is being raised in an unstable environment. Someone needs to provide him with proper guidance. By telling an 8-year-old that his father is a bad person, by coaching him to lie to his teacher, by filing a lawsuit behind our backs. Deanna's mother spoke for the first time. Elwood, what lawsuit? It's a matter of protecting our grandson. It's psychological abuse, Clark interrupted. And it ends tonight. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to withdraw your lawsuit. You're going to cease all contact with Eddie until he's 18 and can decide for himself whether to have a relationship with you. You're going to sign a document admitting what you did and apologizing. And in exchange, we won't file charges or pursue a protection order. Elwood stood, face flushed. You can't dictate terms to me. I have rights. You have nothing. Clark's voice was ice. I have documentation of every single thing you've done. Audio, video, written evidence. I have testimony from Eddie's teacher, his therapist as of 2 days ago, and 3 attorneys who reviewed the case. You've committed child abuse. The question is whether you want to admit it quietly or have it aired in court where everyone in this city will know exactly what kind of person you are. I was trying to save that boy from you. Elwood's composure shattered. You're not good enough for my daughter. You never were. Some nobody with no pedigree, no family history, thinking you can raise a Peterson? Eddie deserves better than your mediocre genes and working class values. There it was. The truth, finally spoken. Deanna stood, trembling with rage. Get out. Both of you. Now. Deanna, sweetheart. I said get out. You've been poisoning my son against his father because of your own sick prejudices? You filed a lawsuit without telling me? I can't even look at you right now. Glenna was crying. I didn't know. Elwood, what have you done? But Elwood's face had closed down. I've done what was necessary, and I have no intention of agreeing to anything. You want a war, Clark? You'll get one. I'll see you in court. He stormed out. Glenna followed, sobbing. Clark turned to Deanna. He took option B. What? I gave him a chance to do this quietly. He chose the public route. So now we really do destroy him. Monday morning, Patricia Ruiz filed the protection order. By noon, DCFS had been notified and assigned an investigator. By 5 p.m., the story had leaked to a local journalist who specialized in family court issues, not by accident. Clark had spent Sunday night writing a detailed timeline and sending it to someone he trusted to tell the story fairly. The article ran Wednesday morning. Retired principal accused of psychological abuse of grandson in custody plot. It included quotes from the court filing, background on Elwood's failed lawsuit, and expert commentary on grandparents' rights cases gone wrong. Within hours, Elwood's phone was ringing. Former colleagues calling to ask if it was true. Parents from his old school demanding answers. The superintendent of the district where he'd worked for 30 years issuing a statement about how disappointed they were to hear these allegations about a former employee. Clark had predicted all of it. He'd spent years studying how public exposure worked, how institutions protected themselves by distancing from scandal, how social networks turned toxic when someone fell from grace. Elwood had spent 30 years building a reputation as an educator, a pillar of the community. That reputation was now ashes. The DCFS investigation concluded in 2 weeks. The protection order was granted. The grandparents' rights case was not only dismissed, but resulted in a formal notation in Elwood's file that he posed a risk to the minor child. In Illinois, such notations were rare and damning. But Clark wasn't finished. He'd been tracking something else during the investigation: Elwood's finances. Old habits from his forensic accounting days. What he found was fascinating. Elwood had spent nearly $40,000 on attorney fees over the past 6 months, draining savings accounts and taking out a loan against his house. The failed lawsuit had cost him dearly. But there was more. In reviewing Elwood's background, Clark discovered that during his tenure as principal, there had been 3 separate complaints from parents about his authoritarian behavior with students. Incidents where Elwood had allegedly told children their parents were failing them, that he knew better about their futures. The complaints had been settled quietly, swept under the rug by a district eager to avoid scandal. Clark compiled this information and sent it to the school board with a simple note: "You might want to review whether Mr. Peterson's retirement should remain honorific given this pattern of behavior." The board voted to revoke Elwood's emeritus status. His name was removed from the plaque in the school's main hall. The scholarship fund bearing his name was quietly renamed. Piece by piece, Clark dismantled everything Elwood valued, and he did it using only the truth. 3 months after the confrontation, Clark sat in his office when his phone rang. Unknown number. "Mr. Compton? This is Glenna Peterson." Clark straightened. "Mrs. Peterson, I wanted you to know I filed for divorce, and I wanted to apologize. I should have seen what Elwood was doing. I should have protected Eddie instead of standing by Elwood. I'm sorry. I appreciate you calling. There's something else. Elwood's been diagnosed with early-stage dementia. The doctors think it might explain some of his behavior, the paranoia, the fixation on control, the poor judgment. It doesn't excuse what he did, but I thought you should know." Clark processed this. Dementia. It actually made sense. The escalation of behavior that had always been present but contained. The inability to see consequences. The rigid thinking. Does he understand what happened? Some days. Other days he's confused, angry. He asks about Eddie, about why everyone abandoned him. I tell him the truth, but he doesn't always remember. After hanging up, Clark sat with this new information. Part of him wanted to feel vindicated. But another part, the part that was still fundamentally decent, felt something more complex. Elwood had hurt his family badly, but he'd also been sick, his worst traits amplified by neurological deterioration. It didn't change what Clark had done. Elwood had still made choices, still hurt Eddie. The consequences were earned and necessary. But it added context. That night, Clark told Deanna about the call. She listened quietly, then said, "Do you regret how we handled it?" "No. If we'd known about the dementia earlier, I might have approached it differently. But Eddie comes first. Always. And what we did ensured he'll never be hurt like that again. My mother wants to see Eddie. She's been going to therapy, trying to understand how she enabled my father for so long. She asked if we consider supervised visits." Clark thought about it. What does Eddie want? He misses his grandma. Not his grandpa, but his grandma. Then we set clear boundaries, we supervise, and we see how it goes. But the first sign of any manipulation, any toxicity, and it ends. Deanna nodded. Agreed. 6 months after everything started, life had found a new equilibrium. Eddie was thriving in therapy. His nightmares had stopped, and he'd started eating lunch at school again. Glenna had supervised visits twice a month, always at neutral locations, and she was careful to never mention Elwood or undermine Clark and Deanna's parenting. Elwood lived in a nursing home now, his dementia progressing. Glenna visited him 3 times a week, but she'd build a life separate from his shadow. She joined a support group for families of dementia patients and started volunteering at a children's literacy program. Clark had returned to his normal work, but something had changed in him. He'd always been good at his job, but now he understood viscerally why it mattered. He'd started taking on more pro bono cases involving family law issues, using his skills to help parents fighting custody battles against abusive partners or manipulative relatives. One evening, as Clark and Eddie worked on a model rocket in the garage, their new weekly tradition, Eddie asked, "Dad, do you think Grandpa Elwood really thought he was helping me?" Clark set down his glue gun and considered the question. "I think he convinced himself he was. Sometimes people do bad things believing they're doing good. That doesn't make it okay, but it's important to understand. Do you forgive him?" "I don't know if forgiveness is the right word. I understand what happened. I know he was sick, but I also know he hurt you, and my job as your dad is to protect you. I make the same choices again, even the part where you got him in trouble. Even that, because sometimes the only way to protect someone you love is to stop the person hurting them." Completely. Eddie nodded slowly, processing. Then he picked up the rocket fin he'd been sanding. "I'm glad you're my dad. Not just because you protected me, but because you didn't just yell or hit or do what Grandpa would have done. You were smarter." Clark pulled his son into a hug. "Being smart isn't about being clever, buddy. It's about knowing what matters and doing whatever it takes to protect it. You matter. Our family matters. Everything else is just details." Later that night, after Eddie was asleep, Clark stood in the garage looking at the space where he'd first watched Elwood throw away his son's lunch. So much had changed from that moment. A simple act of surveillance had unraveled a conspiracy, exposed a pattern of abuse, and ultimately protected his family. But it had also taught him something important about himself. He'd always prided himself on being controlled, methodical, professional. What he'd learned was that those traits weren't just about his career. They were about who he was fundamentally, someone who could channel rage into precision, fear into planning, and love into unwavering protection. Elwood had underestimated him, had seen a working-class forensic accountant and assumed incompetence, had thought he could manipulate an 8-year-old child without consequences, had believed his own superiority would protect him. He'd been wrong on every count, and in being wrong, he'd given Clark the opportunity to show exactly what he was capable of when someone threatened his family. Not violence, not cruelty, but something far more devastating. Systematic, methodical destruction using only the truth and the law. Clark's phone buzzed. A text from Patricia Ruiz. "Thought you'd want to know. Elwood's attorneys just withdrew his appeal of the protection order. It's over. Over. Officially, legally, permanently over." Clark typed back, "Thank you for everything." He walked inside, locked the door, and climbed the stairs to where his family slept safely. Deanna was reading in bed, and she looked up as he entered. "Everything okay?" "Everything's perfect," he said, and meant it, because he'd won, not through luck or chance, but through being smarter, more thorough, and more committed than his enemy. He'd protected his son, exposed an abuser, and ensured his family would never face that threat again. In the morning, he'd pack Eddie's lunch, PB&J, apple slices, granola bar, juice box. The same routine he'd always had, but with the certainty that this time, Eddie would actually eat it. No one would intercept it. No one would replace it with poison-laced messages. No one would use food as a weapon against his child. It was such a simple thing, a lunch, but it represented everything Clark had fought for: normalcy, safety, family, love. And he'd earned it, every bit of it, through sheer force of will and calculated precision. Elwood Peterson had started this war thinking he'd save his grandson from an unworthy father. Instead, he learned exactly why you should never underestimate a man protecting his family, especially not a man like Clark Compton, who turned investigations into weapons and used patience as a blade sharper than any act of immediate violence could ever be. The lunchbox sat on the kitchen counter, ready for tomorrow. Clark picked it up, feeling its familiar weight, and smiled. Game over. He'd won. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.